The moment a scapegoat child finally summons the courage to break free from their narcissistic family system, the entire family structure doesn't just wobble, it bloody well implodes like a house of cards in a hurricane. You have to understand, this isn't a minor disturbance, it's a seismic event. It is the pulling of the cornerstone from a structurally unsound building, and the collapse that follows is not only inevitable, it is absolute. I've seen this in my clinical practice more times than I can count. I'm thinking of a client, a woman of 35, who came to me absolutely hollowed out by a lifetime of being the designated problem in her family. For 3.5 decades, every argument, every financial stress, every marital spat between her parents, every failure of her golden child, brother, it was all somehow her fault. She was the lightning rod for the family's dysfunction. She absorbed the blame for sins she didn't commit and for problems that had existed long before she was even born. Finally, after a particularly brutal episode of psychological warfare waged by her mother, she did the unthinkable. She went no contact. She changed her number, blocked them on social media, and refused all attempts at communication. You might think this would bring a quiet resolution. You would be catastrophically wrong. What happened next was a psychological detonation. Within 6 months, her mother, the narcissistic matriarch, had a nervous breakdown so severe she required hospitalization. Her enabling father, lost without his wife's primary target, began drinking heavily. Her 2 siblings, who had gleefully participated in the scapegoating, suddenly turned on each other with a venom that shocked everyone. The golden child, stripped of his foil, developed a crippling anxiety disorder, and the parents' marriage, once a united front against their difficult daughter, teetered on the brink of a nasty divorce. The entire kingdom fell into chaos because its dragon slayer, its sin eater, had walked off the job. You see, a narcissistic family system is not a democracy. It is a tyranny, and it has a very specific architecture. It's built like a pyramid. At the very top sits the narcissist, the pharaoh, whose fragile ego is the sun around which all other bodies must orbit. The other family members, the enabler, the golden child, the lost child, they all have their roles, their orbits determined by their utility to the narcissist. But the entire damn structure, the thing that gives it its stability, rests on a single, foundational cornerstone, the scapegoat. The scapegoat's function is not merely to be the problem child. That's a shallow, pathetic explanation for a dynamic that is profoundly more sinister. The scapegoat is the family's emotional garbage disposal. They are the living, breathing container for every ounce of shame, inadequacy, and self-loathing that the narcissistic parent cannot bear to face in themselves. They project their darkness onto this child, and in doing so, they cleanse themselves. The narcissist gets to remain perfect, blameless, a martyr. The family gets to maintain the illusion of health because they have a designated patient, a focal point for all their pathology. There's a brutal evolutionary logic to this, twisted as it is. For millennia, human groups have identified scapegoats. It's an ancient survival mechanism. When things go wrong, the hunt fails, the crops wither, you find someone to blame, you cast them out, and you restore order to the tribe. It's a way of simplifying a terrifyingly complex world. But what we're seeing in the narcissistic family is that ancient, primitive mechanism gone hideously pathological. It's a system that has turned inward and begun to devour its own. And here's the terrible irony in all of this, the part that is truly heartbreaking. The scapegoat is almost always the psychologically healthiest member of the family. Think about that for a moment. The person labeled weak, problematic, mentally unstable is in fact the strongest. And why? Because they are the only one who has been forced to confront a reality that isn't a complete fabrication. While the others live in the narcissist's distorted funhouse of mirrors, the scapegoat is the one getting punched in the face by reality. They are the only ones who have had to develop actual, real-world coping mechanisms. They are forced to build resilience, to question, to seek external validation, to develop a self outside the toxic confines of the family unit. They have to become strong because they have no other choice. They are, in a very real sense, the family's unwitting hero forged in the very fires meant to consume them. Now, I want you to think about this and maybe reflect on it in a serious way. Have you ever witnessed a family where one person seemed to carry all the blame for everything that went wrong? Someone who, when they weren't around, the family seemed lost, confused, unable to function. You might have seen it in your own family or a friend's. You might have seen that when this person was absent, a strange and frantic energy took over as the family members scrambled, consciously or not, to find a new target for their negativity. That is the vacuum effect of a scapegoat's departure. This isn't just folk psychology, it's grounded in well-established theory. Murray Bowen's work on family systems theory, his concepts of differentiation of self and family projection, maps this out perfectly. The less differentiated the members of a family are, the more emotionally enmeshed they are, the more likely they are to triangulate and project their anxiety onto a third party. The scapegoat is the ultimate destination for that projection. From a Jungian perspective, you could say the scapegoat is the designated shadow carrier. They are forced to embody all the dark, repressed, and denied aspects of the family's collective psyche. The narcissist, by definition, a creature who cannot face their own shadow, outsources it. They hand their darkness to their child and say, "Here, you carry this for me." But here's where it gets really interesting and disturbing. When that scapegoat finally says, "Enough," and walks away, something extraordinary happens. They take the shadow with them, and the family, for the first time in perhaps decades, is left alone in a well-lit room with its own undealt, with darkness. And they have absolutely no idea what to do. You bloody well know what I'm talking about when I say this, the first thing that happens when the scapegoat leaves isn't relief. It's absolute panic. It's not a quiet sigh from the family system as a source of tension is removed. No. It's the shriek of a machine that has just had its most critical gear torn out while running at full speed. It's the frantic, primal terror of an organism that has lost its primary adaptive mechanism, however pathological that mechanism might have been. The calm you might expect is a damnable illusion. What truly rushes into the void is chaos, pure, unadulterated chaos. This is the vacuum effect. A narcissistic family system is a closed pressure system, and the scapegoat serves as its primary pressure release valve. Every unresolved tension, every repressed rage, every ounce of existential dread is vented through them. When that valve is suddenly, irrevocably sealed shut, the pressure doesn't just dissipate. It builds, and it builds rapidly until the containing walls of the system begin to fracture and burst. The immediate aftermath is a frenzy of desperation. I've seen it manifest in ways that would be darkly comical if they weren't so tragic. I had one client, a young man who finally moved across the country to escape a lifetime of being blamed for his mother's unhappiness. 2 weeks after he left, his family filed a missing persons report. When the police located him perfectly safe and employed, his mother insisted to the officers that he had been brainwashed and was a danger to himself. This wasn't concern. This was a desperate attempt to reassert control, to pathologize his escape, to drag him back into his designated role as the family's primary problem. In another case, a mother had a full-blown psychotic break when her son, the family scapegoat, refused to answer her calls for a month. Her identity was so fused with her role as the long-suffering mother of a difficult child that without him to blame for her misery, her entire psychological structure disintegrated. She had nowhere to project her demons, so they turned inward and consumed her. And what happens when these initial frantic attempts to retrieve the scapegoat fail? The system, in its pathological wisdom, understands it cannot function without a blame absorber, and so begins the desperate, panicked scramble for a new scapegoat. It's like a grim game of musical chairs. The music stops, and the remaining family members look at each other with dawning horror, wondering who will be the next to be cast into the void. Very often, the role falls to the one who is least equipped to handle it, the golden child. The perfect one who has spent their entire life propped up by the implicit comparison to the bad one suddenly finds themselves in the crosshairs. For the first time, their minor flaws are magnified into catastrophic failures. Their achievements are no longer good enough. The narcissistic parent, starved for a target, turns their critical gaze upon them, and the golden child's world begins to crumble. The enabler, too, faces a crisis. The spouse or sibling who co-signed the narcissist's narrative can no longer hide behind the smokescreen of the scapegoat's issues. The real problems in the family, the narcissist's volatility, the marriage's emptiness, are now laid bare, and the enabler is left standing in the harsh light of reality with no one else to blame. From a neurological standpoint, this panic is almost a foregone conclusion. The narcissistic brain is, in some fundamental way, incapable of self-correction through introspection. Its entire processing system is geared towards externalization. When faced with a problem or a personal failing, the default pathway is not to ask, "What did I do wrong?" but "Who can I blame?" The scapegoat provides a permanent, reliable answer to that question. Removing them is like removing a limb. The brain's body map still registers its presence and doesn't know how to function without it. It keeps sending signals to a limb that is no longer there. There's a chilling historical parallel here. Think of totalitarian regimes. They absolutely require a primary enemy and other to blame for all the state's failings. They need a Goldstein, a Trotsky, a class of enemies of the people. This external enemy serves to unify their followers, to distract from internal corruption, and to justify their authoritarian control. When that enemy is defeated or disappears, what happens? The regime doesn't relax into a benevolent peace. It immediately begins to search for a new enemy. It has to, or else it risks facing the consequences of its own incompetence and collapsing from within. The narcissistic family is a totalitarian state in miniature, and the scapegoat is its designated enemy of the people. The philosopher René Girard wrote extensively about this. His scapegoat mechanism is a cornerstone of his thought, the idea that human societies are built on mimetic desire. We want what others want, which inevitably leads to rivalry and conflict. To prevent this conflict from tearing the society apart, the community unconsciously converges on a single individual, a scapegoat, and projects all of its collective violence and sin onto them. The ritual killing or expulsion of the scapegoat purges the community's tension and restores a temporary, fragile peace. This is what's happening in these families. They are engaging in a perpetual, low-grade ritual sacrifice to maintain their own diseased equilibrium. And here's absolutely devastating. The family members genuinely don't understand why they feel so lost without their punching bag. They experience the scapegoat's departure not as the removal of a victim, but as an act of profound betrayal and abandonment. They feel wronged. They feel wounded. Their grief and panic are, in their own minds, completely genuine because they are utterly blind to the role they forced the scapegoat to play. They don't miss the person. They miss the function that person served. They miss the stability that came from having a designated repository for all their darkness. This leads to the most practical and dangerous part of the immediate aftermath, the hoovering. Just like a Hoover vacuum cleaner, the family will try with all its might to suck the escaped scapegoat back into the system. This can take many forms. There's love bombing sudden, uncharacteristic declarations of affection and remorse. There are manufactured crises, a sudden illness, a financial emergency, a dramatic family fight that only you can solve. And of course, there are the guilt trips deployed with surgical precision. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? These are not good faith attempts at reconciliation. They are the desperate, calculated maneuvers of an addict trying to secure their next fix. Now, if you think that initial chaos is bad, wait until you see what happens when the narcissistic parent realizes their primary source of emotional regulation and narcissistic supply has permanently dried up. The panic then begins to curdle into something far more malevolent. I've seen 60-year-old mothers have complete psychological breakdowns because their scapegoat child blocked them on Facebook. Now stop and think about that for a moment. Think about how pathologically, terrifyingly dependent that is. An entire adult identity, a life built over 6 decades, so fragile that it can be shattered by a single click on a social media website. This isn't just a matter of hurt feelings or a family squabble. This is an existential crisis. It's the desperate, flailing panic of an addict whose drug supply has been abruptly and permanently cut off. You have to understand this, and it's a crucial point. Narcissistic parents are not merely seeking attention. They are addicts, and their drug of choice is something called narcissistic supply. And the scapegoat is their primary, uncut, high-grade source of that supply. What is supply? It's the emotional reaction, any emotional reaction they can provoke from you. It's your anger, your tears, your frantic attempts to defend yourself, your pained silence, your desperate pleas for fairness. All of it. To the narcissist, these reactions are fuel. They are proof of their power, their relevance, their very existence. They get a neurochemical hit from the drama and conflict, a surge of dopamine and adrenaline that reassures them they are the center of the universe. When they torment their scapegoat, they are not just being cruel, they are self-medicating. So, what happens when that supply vanishes? What happens when the scapegoat stops reacting, stops pleading, stops fighting back? It triggers a full-blown identity collapse in the narcissistic parent. You have to ask yourself, if your entire sense of self, your very identity, is built upon the flimsy foundation of being better than someone else, the long-suffering parent, the righteous martyr, the misunderstood victim of a difficult child, what happens when that someone else disappears from the stage? Who are you then? The answer is terrifying. You are nothing. The entire edifice of their self-worth was a comparative illusion. And when the point of comparison is removed, the illusion dissolves into a terrifying void. I worked with the family of a man, a father who for 30 years had built his local reputation on the story of his failure of a son. Every conversation at the pub, every family gathering was an opportunity for him to lament his son's poor choices, his lack of ambition, his ingratitude. It was his favorite story, the one that defined him as a patient, burdened patriarch. Then the son, a quiet but resilient man, moved away, finished a doctorate, started a wildly successful business, and cut off all contact. The father was absolutely decimated. He couldn't function. People would ask him how his son was doing, and he would stammer and change the subject. His central narrative, the pillar of his identity, had been demolished. He had no story left to tell. Without his son's failure to contrast with his own supposed virtue, he was just an unremarkable, bitter old man, and he couldn't bear it. This is the projection crisis. All those negative traits the narcissist couldn't stand in themselves. The laziness, the incompetence, the malevolence, the shame, they didn't just disappear. They were projected, externalized, and dumped into the scapegoat. The scapegoat became the container for the parent's shadow self. But when the container is removed, where does all that darkness go? It comes roaring back to its source. The narcissist is suddenly forced to confront the very demons they've spent a lifetime denying. And because their psychological immune system is virtually non-existent, they have absolutely no defense against this onslaught of self-loathing. From a neurological perspective, it's a brutal withdrawal. The narcissistic brain's reward system, which for decades has been conditioned to fire in response to the drama of scapegoating, goes haywire. The reliable source of dopamine hits is gone. The parent is left in a state of anhedonia and agitation, pacing the cage of their own mind, desperately seeking something to fill the emptiness. This is when you see the frantic search for replacement supply. They might suddenly develop a mysterious, dramatic illness that requires constant attention. They might leap into a new whirlwind relationship, seeking the initial validation of a new admirer. They might start feuds with neighbors or colleagues. They will join dating apps, overshare on social media, insert themselves into their other children's lives with a suffocating intensity. Anything, absolutely anything, to get a reaction, to get a hit, to prove they still exist. This dynamic is explained with devastating clarity in the work of Heinz Kohut, a psychoanalyst who developed the field of self-psychology. Kohut argued that narcissists have a fragmented, underdeveloped sense of self. To feel whole and to regulate their own self-esteem, they rely on others to function as self-objects. A self-object is another person who isn't experienced as a separate individual, but as an extension of the narcissist's own self, there to provide validation and mirroring. The scapegoat is the ultimate negative self-object. They exist to confirm the narcissist's grandiosity by embodying everything the narcissist is not. When the scapegoat reclaims their status as a separate human being, they are, in essence, amputating a part of the narcissist's psychological self. And let's be brutally clear about the biological reality here. This isn't just emotional dependence. This is neurochemical dependence. The stress hormones, the adrenaline, the cycle of tension and release created by the family drama. This becomes a physiological baseline. The narcissist's body becomes addicted to the chaos. The peace and quiet that follows a scapegoat's departure is, to them, not peaceful at all. It's the terrifying silence of withdrawal, a sensory deprivation that their system registers as a threat to its very survival. And modern culture, particularly social media, pours gasoline on this fire. It offers the narcissist a global stage for their victim narrative, a host of new avenues for harassment, and a potentially endless supply of superficial validation from strangers who don't know the real story. But here's the thing that's even more disturbing. While the narcissistic parent is having their identity crisis, writhing in the agony of withdrawal, something else is happening to the other family members who were left behind. The shockwaves of the scapegoat's departure are just beginning to reach them, and the entire rotten structure is preparing for its next, even more catastrophic collapse. What do you do when the person who's been absorbing all the family's dysfunction for 30 years suddenly isn't there anymore? What happens when the emotional black hole that consumed all the rage, all the disappointment, all the bitterness simply vanishes? If you're the golden child, the one who built your entire identity on the reflected glory of not being the problem, you bloody well panic. You panic because the game has changed and the rules you mastered are now worthless. The ground beneath your feet has given way. This is the domino effect. It's an iron law of systems theory. You don't get to remove a foundational piece of a structure and expect the rest of it to remain standing. The departure of the scapegoat is the first domino to fall, and what follows is a cascade of psychological collapse that ripples through every remaining member of the family. First, and most spectacularly, comes the golden child's fall from grace. For their entire life, the golden child's identity has been a comparative one. They were the good one, the successful one, the easy one, but only in relation to the scapegoat, who was designated the bad one, the failure, the difficult one. The scapegoat was the dark background against which their gold could glitter. They never had to develop a robust, independent sense of self. Their worth was guaranteed by the system. But when the scapegoat leaves, the background vanishes. Suddenly, the golden child is standing alone on a brightly lit stage, and for the first time, the narcissistic parent's critical gaze falls directly upon them. Every minor mistake is now a catastrophe. Every B+ is a failure. Every decision is questioned. The narcissist, starved for a target, needs a new place to project their disappointment, and the golden child is the most convenient candidate. The very position that was once their shield now becomes their prison. I saw this with devastating clarity in one family I worked with. The scapegoat, a daughter, went no contact after decades of abuse. Within 3 months, her older brother, the golden child, a successful lawyer, developed a severe anxiety disorder. He started having panic attacks before going to court. Why? Because his narcissistic father, who had once lauded his every move, now relentlessly criticized him. The father, deprived of his primary target, had simply re-aimed his weapon. At the same time, the enabling father of another family, whose wife was the primary narcissist, began drinking heavily within months of his scapegoated son's departure. For years, he had used his son's troubles as a distraction, a reason to stay out late, a topic of commiseration with his friends. Without that excuse, he was left with the stark, unbearable reality of his empty marriage and his own cowardice. The bottle became his new scapegoat. The enabler's awakening is a particularly grim spectacle. For years, they have been the co-signer of the narcissist's lies, the silent partner in the scapegoat's abuse. They were able to maintain a semblance of peace, a fragile personal equilibrium, by never challenging the dominant narrative. The scapegoat's problems were a convenient smokescreen that allowed the enabler to avoid confronting the narcissist, and more importantly, to avoid confronting their own complicity and powerlessness. With the scapegoat gone, the smokescreen lifts. The enabler is now in the room alone with the tyrant. There is no one else to blame, no one to triangulate, no one to absorb the narcissist's unpredictable rage. They are forced to face the truth of their situation. They are not a partner in a marriage, but a hostage in a two-person cult. Then there are the other siblings, the ones who may have been lost children or active participants in the abuse. For them, the scapegoat's absence triggers a terrifying moral and psychological reckoning. The brothers and sisters who once found common ground in mocking or ostracizing the scapegoat suddenly find that their primary social bond has dissolved. Worse, they are haunted by guilt. They are forced to confront the fact that they stood by, or even joined in, while their sibling was being psychologically brutalized. This guilt can curdle into resentment, either towards the departed scapegoat for abandoning them to this chaos, or towards the narcissistic parent whose true nature is now impossible to deny. The old alliances shatter, and new, vicious conflicts erupt as they scramble for position in the destabilized system. This is precisely what the pioneers of family systems theory, like Salvador Minuchin, described in their work on structural family therapy. Minuchin saw the family not as a collection of individuals, but as a system with a defined structure, complete with subsystems, boundaries, and alliances. In a dysfunctional family, this structure is rigid and pathological, organized around maintaining a dysfunctional status quo. The scapegoat is a key structural element. They are the linchpin. When you remove them, you don't just create a hole, you destabilize the entire architecture. The system is thrown into a state of crisis, and it must either collapse or undergo a radical and excruciatingly painful reorganization. You could say that these family members have been living in a house of mirrors. The mirrors were cleverly angled by the narcissist to distort reality. In those mirrors, the narcissist looked like a saint, the golden child looked like a hero, the enabler looked like a patient spouse, and the scapegoat looked like a monster. It was an illusion, but it was a comfortable one. The scapegoat's departure is the equivalent of someone walking into that fun house and turning on all the overhead fluorescent lights. Suddenly, the mirrors are just glass. The family members see themselves and each other without the flattering distortion. They see the truth, and the truth that emerges is often hideous. Without the scapegoat to blame for the constant tension, the real problems become glaringly visible: the narcissist's bottomless need and rage, the enabler's spinelessness, the profound emotional emptiness at the core of the family. This is often when generational trauma becomes visible to the next generation. Grandchildren who once had a decent relationship with their narcissistic grandparent suddenly see a flash of that coldness and manipulation directed at them or their parents, and they finally understand the stories the escaped scapegoat had been telling all along. Now, you might think that this brutal confrontation with the truth would be a catalyst for healing and change. You might hope that seeing the dysfunction so clearly would force the family to seek help and begin the hard work of repair. But that would be to underestimate the insidious, preserving power of the narcissistic system. A system built on lies does not easily surrender to the truth. When the truth becomes undeniable, the system doesn't turn inward to heal, it turns outward to attack. I had a client whose mother sent a 47-page, single-spaced letter to every single member of their extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins she hadn't seen in 20 years, detailing with the precision of a prosecutor every perceived sin her daughter had ever committed. It was a magnum opus of character assassination, a meticulously crafted document designed to prove, beyond any doubt, that her child was evil, ungrateful, and mentally disturbed. Now listen, and listen carefully. That's not grief. That's not the heartbroken cry of a loving parent. That's warfare. That is the scorched earth strategy of a death-throned tyrant trying to salt the earth so that nothing can ever grow in their former territory again. When the narcissist's frantic attempts to hoover the scapegoat back into the system fail, when the love, bombing, and guilt trips prove futile, the dynamic shifts from desperate retrieval to all-out war. The goal is no longer to reclaim the scapegoat, the goal is to annihilate them. If the narcissist cannot have you as a source of supply, they will have you as a villain. If they cannot control you, they will, by God, control the story about you. And this isn't just a few angry words whispered behind your back. It is a systematic, relentless, and often brutally effective campaign to destroy your reputation, your relationships, and your social standing. This is the smear campaign, and it is the narcissistic parent's primary weapon in the war against the scapegoat's freedom. The first volley is always character assassination. The parent becomes the master historian of your pathology, rewriting your entire life story through the lens of your supposed dysfunction. Your childhood independence becomes oppositional defiance. Your adolescent struggles become proof of instability. Your adult success becomes a lucky break you didn't deserve. They will lie, they will exaggerate, they will twist truths into monstrous perversions of reality. They do this to convince others, but first and foremost, they do it to convince themselves, to reinforce the crumbling victim narrative that is central to their identity. To wage this war, the narcissist needs an army, and so they recruit their flying monkeys, a term drawn from the Wizard of Oz that perfectly captures the dynamic. These are the enablers, the other siblings, the gullible relatives and family friends who are deputized and sent out to do the narcissist's bidding. They are armed with the narcissist's distorted narrative and dispatched to harass the scapegoat, to report back with information, and to spread the poison of the smear campaign throughout the community. They are the agents of the tyrant. And often, they don't even realize the role they're playing. They genuinely believe they are helping a concerned parent or mediating a family dispute. They have been weaponized. In the modern age, this warfare has gone digital. The narcissist uses technology as a force multiplier with terrifying efficiency. They will stalk your social media accounts, creating fake profiles to bypass your blocks. They will send your friends and colleagues long, rambling emails filled with concerns about your mental health. They have been known to contact employers seeking to sabotage the scapegoat's career. Every digital footprint you leave becomes a potential weapon to be used against you. The internet becomes their global stage, a place to broadcast their victimhood to an audience of strangers who will offer them sympathy and validate their twisted version of events. And at the heart of all this is the narcissist's masterpiece, the victim narrative. In this story, they are the selfless, loving parent who has been cruelly abandoned by a cold, ungrateful, and mentally unstable child. They will weep, they will lament, they will perform their grief with theatrical perfection. This performance is not only for others, it is for themselves. It is a vital psychological defense. By casting themselves as the ultimate victim, they can completely absolve themselves of any responsibility for the estrangement. It allows them to deny the decades of their own abuse and to project the role of the abuser onto the one person who finally had the courage to escape it. When the narrative isn't enough, the campaign often escalates to legal harassment. This can include filing false police reports for wellness checks designed to intimidate and embarrass. It can involve frivolous lawsuits or, most heinously, the weaponization of grandchildren in bitter custody battles. They will use the institutions of society, the police, the courts, the social services, as instruments of their personal vendetta, all under the guise of concern. They will manipulate churches, schools, and community groups, leveraging their social standing to isolate the scapegoat and paint them as a pariah. Let's be clear about what this is. This is psychological warfare, and the tactics are drawn from the same playbook used by cult leaders and totalitarian regimes. The goal is to isolate the dissident, control the flow of information, and destroy their credibility so that no one will listen to them. It is an attempt at psychological annihilation. And why? What drives this level of venomous desperation? Because the scapegoat's independent, healthy life is the single greatest threat to the narcissist's existence. Your happiness is proof that their narrative was a lie. Your success is a judgment on their failure as a parent. Your peace is a mirror that reflects their own internal chaos. They are not just angry, they are existentially threatened. They must destroy your new reality because it invalidates their own. There's an evolutionary angle here. 2, humans are profoundly social creatures, and we are hardwired to be exquisitely sensitive to gossip and social reputation. Negative information about others is sticky, it captures our attention. A master manipulator, like the narcissist, knows this intuitively. They know how to craft a story that plays on our deepest fears of social deviance and betrayal. They hijack our innate social policing mechanisms for their own pathological ends. And here we arrive at the final tragic irony of the smear campaign. Its intensity is directly proportional to how much the narcissistic parent actually needs that child. The more vicious the attacks, the more desperate the lies, the more relentless the harassment, the more it reveals the gaping, bottomless void in the narcissist's own soul. The ferocity of their war against you is a perfect measure of the importance of the role you were forced to play in their life. It is the most twisted, backhanded compliment imaginable. But here's what's truly remarkable. While all this chaos is happening, while this toxic war is being waged in the crumbling family system, something extraordinary is occurring in the life of the escaped scapegoat. Something they never would have thought possible. Here's something that will shock you, and I mean really shock you to the core of your being the child who was labeled as the problem. For decades, the one designated as the source of all chaos and dysfunction often becomes the most psychologically healthy, integrated, and formidable member of the entire family within just a few years of escape. And that isn't just an ironic twist of fate. It is the logical, necessary, and triumphant reassertion of reality over a pathological fiction. It is the phoenix rising not from mythological flames, but from the very real ashes of psychological warfare. While the narcissistic family system is cannibalizing itself in a frenzy of collapsing narratives and misdirected rage, the escaped scapegoat is undergoing a profound transformation. The first step is simply the quiet, steady process of healing that begins when a chronic poison is removed from a living system. For years, the scapegoat has been living in a state of constant, low-grade and sometimes high-grade warfare. Their nervous system has been marinated in cortisol and adrenaline, locked in a perpetual state of fight, flight, or freeze. The simple absence of that daily onslaught of toxicity allows their natural resilience, the biological imperative towards health that exists in every organism, to finally emerge. The chronic tension begins to bleed out of their shoulders. The hyper-vigilance begins to soften. They start to sleep through the night, perhaps for the first time in their adult lives. This isn't some new age fantasy. This is neuroplasticity in action. The brain, that unbelievably adaptable organ, literally begins to rewire itself. The neural pathways that were thickened and overused, the pathways of threat detection, of anxiety, of rumination, start to prune themselves back. New pathways begin to form in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought and emotional regulation. The hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning that is so often damaged by chronic stress, can begin to heal. The brain, freed from the pathological environment that deformed it, starts to physically reshape itself into an organ of peace and potential rather than an organ of perpetual survival. And the real world results of this are nothing short of miraculous. I've seen the clinical examples time and time again. I'm thinking of a young woman who was told her entire life that she was irresponsible and a failure. Within 5 years of going no contact, she had built a 7-figure online business from scratch. She wasn't a failure, she had just refused to play her family's rigged game. I'm thinking of another client, a man who was constantly called crazy and emotionally unstable by his family because he dared to call out their abuse. He is now a practicing therapist using the profound empathy he forged in the fires of his own trauma to help others heal. Their pathologies were never pathologies at all. They were sane reactions to an insane environment. Perhaps the most crucial part of this liberation is the development of authentic relationships. The scapegoat has to learn, often for the first time, what healthy love actually looks like. The conditional, transactional, manipulative affection of the narcissistic family is a poor teacher. In its place, they begin to build relationships based on reciprocity, respect, and genuine care. They discover what it's like to have a friend you can share good news with, who celebrates your victories instead of trying to diminish them. They learn what it feels like to be in a romantic relationship where conflict leads to resolution, not punishment. They have to build a new family from the ground up, a chosen family that offers the safety and validation their biological family never could. This is also why therapy suddenly becomes exponentially more effective. Attempting therapy while still enmeshed in a narcissistic family system is like trying to build a sandcastle during high tide. For every bit of progress you make, a wave of family sabotage, guilt, tripping, and gaslighting comes along and washes it away. But once you've escaped, the therapeutic space becomes a sanctuary, a clean laboratory where real work can finally be done. Without the constant interference and pathology reinforcement, the client and the therapist can form a powerful alliance, and the breakthroughs can come with astonishing speed. What emerges from this process is the true self. For decades, the scapegoat's authentic personality has been buried under layers of shame, guilt, and the false identity projected onto them by the family. The healing process is an archaeological dig. They begin to unearth parts of themselves they never knew existed, hobbies, passions, personality traits, and ambitions that were suppressed because they were threatening to the family system. They discover they have a sense of humor, that they are creative, that they are capable leaders. It is a profound and joyous rediscovery of who they were always meant to be. This aligns perfectly with the research on post-traumatic growth. The idea here is that people who endure severe adversity don't just bounce back to their previous baseline. In many cases, they can bounce forward, developing a level of psychological strength, spiritual depth, and appreciation for life that surpasses their pre-trauma state. Surviving the crucible of narcissistic abuse can forge a kind of wisdom and resilience that is almost impossible to attain otherwise. And this brings us to the ultimate irony of strength. They were called weak, but they were actually carrying the psychological weight of an entire dysfunctional system on their shoulders. Their escape wasn't an act of cowardice, it was an act of Herculean strength. It was the decision to stop carrying a burden that wasn't theirs to carry. In a very real sense, the scapegoat is the unwitting hero of their own family myth. Their story perfectly parallels Joseph Campbell's monomyth, The Hero's Journey. They receive the call to adventure, the realization that they must leave. They cross the threshold into the unknown. They face the dragon, the family trauma, and the subsequent smear campaign, and they slay it by surviving and healing. They return not to their old home, but to the world, bearing the elixir of their own hard, one wisdom and integrated self. Now, this transformation doesn't happen overnight. And it's not without its challenges. The journey is fraught with grief, with doubt, with the lonely work of rebuilding a life from the ground up. But there's something profound that occurs when the scapegoat finally understands the truth of their own story, a revelation that reframes the entire experience. I want you to imagine something. Imagine discovering that being rejected by your family, the single most painful, foundational wound of your life, was actually the greatest gift they could have possibly given you. Now, that sounds monstrous, doesn't it? It sounds like a perverse justification for abuse, but I want you to set that aside for a moment and really grapple with the idea, because that is the final, liberating, and terrifyingly profound truth that every escaped scapegoat must eventually confront if they are to be truly free. This is the ultimate reframe. It's the alchemy of the soul, turning the lead of your deepest pain into the gold of your most profound wisdom. To see that being cast out was not a damnation, but a liberation. You weren't exiled from paradise, you were ejected from a gulag. You weren't denied love, you were freed from a pathological imitation of it that would have poisoned you to the very marrow of your being. Your family, in their blindness and their pathology, in their desperate need to expel the one person who carried the light of truth, gave you the one thing they never intended to, a chance to have an actual life, your life. And you have to understand this pattern, this role you were forced to play, it didn't start with you. What you were carrying was not just your parents' darkness. You were likely carrying the accumulated, unmetabolized trauma of generations. The role of the scapegoat is a hot potato of psychic pain passed down from parent to child, a cursed inheritance. The family system unconsciously seeks out the child who is perhaps the most sensitive, the most resilient, the one most capable of shouldering the unbearable burden of the family shadow. And in a stroke of cosmic irony, they choose the very person who, because of that sensitivity and resilience, has the greatest potential to finally wake up and put the damn thing down. And that is the choice point. That is the abyss you stand before when you escape. You have survived the fire. You have seen the system for what it is. You are holding this legacy of pain in your hands. Now what? You have two paths, and only two. The first is to allow the poison to do its work. It is to carry the bitterness, the rage, and the sense of victimhood into every new relationship you form, to become a tyrant in your own right, unconsciously seeking out new dynamics in which to replay the old trauma. That path is easy. It is the path of resentment, and it leads straight back to hell. The second path is the path of heroes. It is the decision to say, this stops with me. It is the voluntary adoption of the heaviest burden of all, the responsibility to ensure that this generational curse dies with your generation. You become the firewall. You become the end of the line. And what empowers you to do that? The wisdom you gained in the underworld. Surviving narcissistic abuse teaches you things about human nature that most people will, thankfully, never have to learn. You learn about the reality of malevolence. You learn about the terrifying power of deceit. But you also learn about the unbelievable resilience of the human spirit. You learn the difference between authentic love and its counterfeit. You develop an almost supernatural ability to detect manipulation. You learn through the painful process of having your own boundaries violated for decades, how to build and enforce them with the strength of a fortress wall. This is what I see in my clinical practice all the time. The former scapegoats, the ones who were called too sensitive, develop an empathy that is so profound it's almost a superpower. They can see the pain in others because they have mapped its every contour in their own souls. And because of this, they often become the healers, the therapists, the counselors, the advocates, the artists who guide others out of the same darkness they escaped. They take on the responsibility of being the lamplighters. This is the deepest of all existential truths. This is what Viktor Frankl was talking about. It is the ability and indeed the responsibility of the individual to create meaning out of their suffering. Your life was chaos and pain, But by confronting it, by refusing to be defined by it, and by choosing to build something new from its ruins, you engage in the most profound act of meaning creation possible. And this raises the ultimate question, the one that every escaped scapegoat must answer for themselves. What does it mean to be truly free when that freedom comes at the cost of the very family that was supposed to be your foundation? The answer is that you learn that a foundation built on lies is no foundation at all. It's a trapdoor. And true freedom means learning to build your own foundation on solid ground with materials of your own choosing. This is where you create your chosen family. You find the other people who value truth, who practice reciprocity, who have the courage to celebrate your strengths and the compassion to support your weaknesses. You build your own tribe, your own support system, not based on the accident of blood, but on the conscious choice of mutual respect and authentic connection. You build the ark that will carry you and the ones you truly love through the next flood. And you have a solemn duty to do this, not just for yourself, but for your children, for the future. You have to consider the legacy. How do you raise children in a way that ensures they will never know the role of the scapegoat or the golden child? You do it by modeling authenticity, by respecting their individuality, and by taking responsibility for your own damn shadow, so you never have to project it onto them. So here's what I want you to understand, and this is crucial. The narcissistic family's rejection of the scapegoat isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. They have to reject the healthy one, the truthful one, because that person's very existence threatens the entire pathological structure. Your departure isn't just personal liberation, it's the catalyst that forces the entire family system to confront its own dysfunction. Some families will collapse. Some, a very few, might even be shocked into a journey of healing. But the scapegoat, they finally get to discover who they actually are. Because here's the thing, and it may be the most important thing you ever learn: you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick.